Greetings, this is Jim Wake again. The following comments, which relate to item 5 on this videotape, were made in December 1986. A winter sunrise, looking from King Edward Ridge across terrain we had covered by dog team toward the northern slope of the Old Crow Mountain. This scene was taken from near the same point, but looking in a northerly direction over Old Crow Flats where we were heading. Elias Quadlatchy, breaking trail for his dogs after a very heavy fall of snow. I had to hire him as guide and trail assistant. Scene of trail Elias had made with his team and toboggan. We would take turns breaking trail. This is my team. Teams following the frozen Old Crow River, looking for a promising way to get up the steep bank to the Crow Flats. This is a temporary bridge of spruce boughs cut and thrown across a flooding creek to make it safe for the dogs, drivers, and the loaded toboggans. We are about to arrive at Peterson's winter camp on the east side of Old Crow Flats. Peterson was a white trapper married to an Indian woman. They had 4 children. These scenes were intended to show what usually happened when we called on a trapper and his family, but I didn't expect them to line up. Normally, the dogs were bedded down first, but in this case, the toboggan was unloaded to give a glimpse of the load. 2 kinds of snowshoes, a rifle, bedroll, food box, small sheet metal stove, caribou skin for a mattress, and dry salmon for the dogs. This is one of the Peterson girls visiting her muskrat trap set inside a feeding stool which has been shaped in the underside of the ice by the muskrats. Scene of a live muskrat being removed through a hole in the ice made with an ice chisel. Muskrat teeth are razor sharp, so care need to be taken when dispatching the animal. Here is Elias with 2 trappers who had flown to Old Crow Flats from the Northwest Territories, and a glimpse of some of their muskrat pelts. This is an Indian dog and her pups. I moved in closer with the camera, but you can see that she objected. This is the February mail plane. It originated in Fairbanks, Alaska, but tried to fly from Fort Yukon, where it picked up the mail, to Old Crow and back to Fort Yukon the same day. This was barely possible because of the short days, there being only a few hours daylight. The weather was usually severe, minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, making it necessary for the pilot to drain the oil from the motor and take it inside the detachment office to keep it warm until he was ready to depart. Albert Lord, just returning from hospital. My cabin was cozy in winter. Here I am with the 2 pups Corporal Kirk was raising. The next shot after this is very brief, taken December 21, 1946 at noon. This is my team. We're hauling newly felled logs from the bush. These logs were needed to repair our ice house. It was a tough pull going uphill because the logs were green and consequently much heavier than dry logs would have been. We used only wood for fuel, and it was a frequent chore when we were not on patrol to haul firewood from the bush about 1.5 miles downriver from the village. Here we are on a return trip to the bush. The dogs never like going on a second trip on the same day. Consequently, they aren't running as eagerly as they might have been. Now you see some native men returning to the village. Notice this toboggan with the heart decorations on it. These men had been hunting in what were known locally as the South Mountains, about 20 miles to the south of the village. Here's my team following. Notice that the lead dog has a standing iron decoration on his collar. Here are some men sawing a log on the village's only street. The log is exceptional by reason of the great diameter of the log, when at that time it was hard to find a tree with a diameter greater than 8 inches. Here we see the villagers coming out of church on Easter Sunday, 1947. You can see Julius Kendi, the minister, shaking hands with his parishioners. Notice the type of shake, once up and once down. You will see most of the residents, as very few missed going to church when they were in the village. Now you see Chief Peter Moses. Behind him in the plaid jacket is Johnny Moses. In the church, men sat on one side, women and children on the other. There's John Kendi waving to us. Charlie Peter Charlie and Alfred Peter Charlie, his brother. Moses Teja and Robert Bruce. There's Barsis Kendi shaking hands with her husband Julius. There's little Myra, the chief's wife, and their grandchild. Finally you see Julius and Big Joe apparently checking the count. Old Caroline going down to visit someone at the other end of the village. A young mother with her baby. Note the fancy bonnet, an alternative to the beaded strap shown earlier. A glimpse of the country east of the Porcupine River but south of the tributary Bell River, near the Arctic Circle. Here I'm breaking some frozen buns to thaw by our noon fire. My guide and trail assistant for this particular trip was Johnny Moses. We stopped to visit this Indian meat camp comprising some 5 or more families. It was located between the Porcupine and Eagle Rivers, some distance south of the Bell River. From this camp the men would go out to hunt caribou nearly every day. This is Albert Abel cutting wood outside of his tent. Inside is his wife Ellen roasting a caribou head beside the portable sheet metal stove. This is their daughter Maria. A few of the hunters stopping for a warm-up and tea. Spruce boughs are thrown down near the fire so the men's snow boots will not get wet from melting snow. The man with the cup is myself. Here are some men roasting caribou legs to burn the hair off. They cracked the bones and ate the raw marrow with relish. Charlie Abel and his brother Albert can be seen extracting and eating the marrow. This is Albert. I tried it, but found it too fatty to enjoy. Dog teams coming down a steep riverbank, the driver riding the brake all the way. The camera had to be pointed up, therefore the riverbank seems much flatter than it really was. It was very steep. Here is some open water, an ever possible hazard when traveling on river ice, especially in a storm or in poor light. Observe the frost on the back of the driver, indicating the temperature was severe, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. These are some posed shots to show how we often traveled, running behind the dogs on a good trail. Approaching Johnson's Creek Indian Village, winter home of some Indian families based on Old Crow. The object in the foreground was merely a snow-covered bush. Sawing wood in extremely cold weather. Charlie Peter Charlie chopping. It was minus 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and the lens was sticking, speeding the action. Observe the caribou skin boots, woven rabbit skin pants, and cuffs to the parka of Charlie's daughter sewn up so she wouldn't freeze her hands. This is the little girl's great-grandmother, Margaret Black Fox, who you saw earlier visiting her fish net. I asked her if I could take a moving picture of her, and she says I have to chop some wood, so she did, and now she's carrying it into her cabin. This was one of her two sons, John Charlie. We climbed through a steep pass to this high ridge to make traveling easier. This view looks easterly toward the Mackenzie Mountains. We seem to be above everything but this one mountain when we looked westerly towards Alaska, some 50 miles away. Traveling above the tree line. We were not equipped to camp away from trees, so always depended upon reaching a tree area when it was time to pitch camp. This was one of our camps where dry wood was available for the fire. Some dog yard scenes at Old Crow. First signs of spring breakup on the Porcupine River in front of the village. Garbage from the past winter thrown by Indians over the bank. Much of this would be washed away by floodwaters. When the water gets high enough, the ice breaks loose and starts to flow. The ice will jam, causing the water to rise still further. The jam will break loose and the ice will flow free again, only to jam again and again somewhere. Large pans gradually break up. Caribou are often caught on the ice and lose their lives. High water and ice creates a strange noise that can be heard for miles. Jams raise the water level until the village is about to be flooded. During the two spring breakups that I viewed, the water and ice never overflowed the banks at Old Crow, but came perilously close to doing so. Some of this ice will be left on shore when the river flows free. Clear ice will be used for drinking water while it lasts. The breakup usually takes place in May. Some of this ice could be as thick as 8 feet. Notice how some of it crumbles easily because it's been what they call candled. Claude Tidd, the NC Company manager, was also a movie enthusiast. One Sunday, I decided to dress up and with his help get these pictures. Hannah Nitro, the wife of Trader Joan Nitro, was out for a walk with her children, so we decided to get her into the action also. Observe the baby strap. Change of aperture for close-up unfortunately washed out much of the color. A view of breakup ice flowing in the Porcupine River at the Big Bend near the mouth of the Old Crow River, which is still frozen. Here I'm climbing on some huge cakes of ice left behind in a slough above the village when a jam burst, to show the comparative size of the cakes. Men working a hand-operated capstan to pull the boats into the river. The large boat with the plywood sides was initially purchased by the NC Company to replace the Moose, which had been lost. This boat proved unsatisfactory and was replaced. Observe the cradle and the log rollers underneath. This was the Marion of Dawson, the first boat to be launched in the spring of 1946. This gray wooden boat with canvas sides, which could be rolled up in good weather, was the RCMP boat. It was the last to be launched that year in order that it could be rechinked and painted before launching. Boats were usually placed on log cradles and were moved by putting log rollers underneath and pulling with the long rope from the capstan that had been threaded through a pulley attached to a dead man in the river. Here I'm finishing painting the boat.